If you've spent too long telling yourself you'll start tomorrow, stay with this to the end, because the problem may never have been a lack of willpower. One of the cruelest contradictions in modern life is this: the more seriously you think about your future, the more likely you are to freeze in front of the work that could build it. You care, perhaps more than most people do. And yet when the time comes to begin, your body resists, your mind delays, and tomorrow starts sounding safer than today. To understand that contradiction, we need to look at the hidden conflict inside the brain whenever effort, uncertainty, and possible failure come into view. You probably know this feeling more intimately than you would like. The night before, you make promises to yourself with a kind of private sincerity. Tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow I will wake up earlier. Tomorrow I will sit down and do the work properly. Tomorrow I will finally stop drifting. And then tomorrow arrives, and the first thing you feel is not clarity, not force, not momentum, but weight. The task is still there. The goal is still there. Only now, the distance between you and the first step feels strangely enormous. So you reach for something small. Your phone, a glass of water, a quick reset, a short video to get into the right mood, a few more notes, another article, another plan, another attempt to prepare perfectly for the moment that never quite begins. And by the end of the day, something unsettling has happened. You are tired, but not from movement, drained, but not from progress, exhausted by a day that produced almost nothing except thinking, avoiding, bargaining, and starting over in your head. That is what makes this pattern so painful. From the outside, it can look like laziness, but from the inside, it rarely feels that simple. Truly indifferent people do not usually carry this much quiet shame. They do not feel that sinking sensation when evening falls and the important thing remains untouched. They do not watch the clock with that peculiar mixture of guilt and disbelief, but you do. Which means the real problem is often not that you do not care enough. Sometimes the problem is that you care so much that beginning no longer feels like a simple action. It feels like a test. And once work starts feeling like a test, your whole inner world changes around it. The task is no longer just a task, it becomes evidence. Evidence of whether you are disciplined enough, talented enough, serious enough, capable enough to become the person you imagine. Which means every beginning carries a hidden risk. What if I try and the result is ordinary? What if I put in effort and still fall short? What if the work reveals that I am not as capable as I hoped I was? This is how the loop tightens. You want to do well, so you hesitate. You hesitate, so you delay. You delay, so guilt begins to build. Guilt makes the task heavier. The heavier it feels, the more tempting escape becomes. And then tomorrow appears again, not as a real solution, but as a soft psychological shelter, a place where the ideal version of you can remain untouched for one more day. The danger of procrastination is not just lost time, it is the erosion of trust between you and yourself. Every time you turn away from what matters, a small fracture appears, not dramatic enough to alarm you at first, just a quiet crack. But over time, these cracks accumulate. You begin to see yourself as someone who imagines more than they act, plans more than they move, promises more than they honor. And once that image settles in, it starts shaping your life from underneath. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily. Which is why this cannot be explained by motivation alone. There is something deeper going on. Inside you, there are at least two competing forces. One part is orientated toward the future. It wants growth, mastery, change, meaning. It is drawn toward the version of life that feels larger, fuller, more aligned with who you could become. But another part is far less interested in your long-term vision than in your immediate safety. Its job is not to help you write the novel, build the business, pass the exam, or rebuild your life. Its job is to protect you from distress now. And from the brain's point of view, many important things look distressing before they look rewarding. Hard work contains uncertainty. Effort contains discomfort. Ambition invites judgment. Starting creates the possibility of failure. Even progress can feel threatening. because it forces you to leave the familiar behind. So when you sit down in front of meaningful work, your brain does not always interpret the moment as an opportunity. Very often, it interprets it first as strain. That matters more than most people realize, because once something is registered as strain, your system begins searching for relief, not meaning, not pride, relief. And that is exactly why easy distractions feel so powerful in the moment. Your phone does not need to defeat your ambition in some grand philosophical way. It only needs to offer a faster emotional exit. A few taps, a few images, a few seconds of novelty, and the tension drops. Your brain notices the relief immediately. It learns the pattern quickly. Avoid the difficult thing, feel better now. In the short term, this works beautifully. In the long term, it becomes devastating, because every quick escape trains the brain to associate avoidance with comfort and effort with threat. The result is not just a bad habit, but a reinforced internal pathway. Over time, the work begins to feel heavier before you even touch it. You are no longer responding only to the task itself, but to the emotional memory wrapped around it, the stress of all the previous delays, the guilt of unfinished days, the fear of confirming your own worst suspicions. This is also where many people misunderstand motivation. They think the answer is to feel more inspired, to watch something powerful, read something energizing, wait for that internal surge that will make action feel easy and natural. But motivation is weather. It changes without asking permission. It comes, it leaves, it misleads, it disappears. If you build your life on a feeling that unstable, then your progress will always be hostage to moods. The people who move consistently are not always more inspired than you. Often they simply trust inspiration less. They do not expect emotion to carry the entire weight of their lives. Instead, they build structures that can hold them on the days when emotion collapses. That is what discipline, in its healthiest form, really is. Not self-punishment, not hardness for the sake of hardness, but a bridge across unstable feelings so that your future is not determined by whatever your nervous system happens to prefer on a given afternoon. And then there's another trap, more elegant and therefore more dangerous: perfectionism. Perfectionism often sounds noble. It wears the language of standards, excellence, seriousness, craftsmanship, but very often what lives underneath it is fear. Not fear of doing bad work exactly, but fear of being seen doing imperfect work, fear of beginning in a messy state, fear of discovering that your first attempt is smaller, slower, weaker, or more ordinary than the image you carry in your head. So you tell yourself that you are waiting for the right conditions, more clarity, more time, more preparation, more certainty. But sometimes what you are really waiting for is permission to avoid the humiliation of being a beginner. And that is the deeper sorrow of ambition. The more intensely you want your life to matter, the easier it becomes to treat every imperfect beginning as a threat to your identity. But real skill does not grow in polished moments. Real change does not begin beautifully. Every serious body of work, every strong mind, every person you admire has passed through long stretches of awkward repetition, unclear effort, unimpressive beginnings, and invisible progress. We are simply too enchanted by the finished image to respect the ordinary ugliness of the process. So how do you break the loop? First, by accepting something uncomfortable but liberating. You may never feel fully ready to do difficult things. There may be no glorious morning when energy aligns, fear disappears, and your entire system rises in perfect agreement. Waiting for that moment can become one more refined form of avoidance. Maturity begins when you stop negotiating with that fantasy. You do not wait until the resistance is gone. You move while some of it is still there. Second, begin small enough that your fear cannot turn the task into a mountain. Do not tell yourself to transform your whole life today. The brain hears that as danger. Open the file, write 3 lines, work for 15 minutes, make the short call, start the first visible layer of the thing. Small wins do not look impressive, but they do something. Profound, they teach the nervous system that contact with a task is survivable, that action does not destroy you, that beginning can be ordinary and still be real. Third, design your environment. People routinely overestimate willpower and underestimate friction. If distraction is always within reach, if comfort is always one motion away, if your workspace quietly invites avoidance, then you are forcing yourself into constant combat. And constant combat is exhausting. Put the phone in another room. Clear the desk. Prepare the first step in advance. Shorten the distance between you and the work. Lengthen the distance between you and escape. Do not rely on strength alone. Let the environment carry part of the burden. Fourth, stop hiding inside endless consumption. There is a socially acceptable form of procrastination that looks almost admirable. Another podcast on discipline, another video on productivity, another article on habits, another system, another framework, another deep insight about action. But learning without touching reality can become a sophisticated way of postponing contact with your life. At some point, you do not need more input. You need friction. You need the clumsy beginning. You need the evidence of action. And finally, something many ambitious people resist the most: self-compassion. Not indulgence, not excuse-making, but refusing to turn every failed day into a moral verdict on your character. Shame often pretends to be useful. It tells you that if you are harsh enough with yourself, you will finally change. But in reality, shame usually makes the next attempt heavier. Now you are not only facing difficult work, you are dragging self-contempt into the room with you. That is not fuel, it is weight. A gentler sentence is often more honest and more effective. I did not do what I hoped today, but that does not mean tomorrow is ruined. I can return. I can begin again. I can make the next move without needing to solve my whole identity first. And perhaps that is the real divide between dreamers and people who slowly, quietly change their lives. Not passion, not intensity, not grand declarations, but the willingness to understand how the mind works, to build systems instead of worshiping moods, to tolerate imperfect beginnings, and to keep honoring small actions long after the feeling is faded. Because the truth is simple, even if living it is not. You do not need a better version of yourself in order to begin. Beginning, repeated often enough, is what gradually creates that version. Not every day will feel strong. Not every effort will feel meaningful. Not every step will look impressive. But a small movement, honestly made, is still movement. And enough real movement can pull a person out of a loop that once felt like fate. Maybe growing up is not the day fear disappears. Maybe it is the day you realize fear is still there, doubt is still there, resistance is still there, and you stop handing them the steering wheel. So if today you cannot do everything, let that be true. Just do not abandon the next small step. Sometimes a life does not change in a dazzling moment. Sometimes it changes when a hand finally reaches, quietly, for the work it has avoided for far too long. And if you want to keep exploring the hidden movements that shape the mind more than we admit, stay with Psypher.